The sky over Hollow Bend turned the color of rust when they traded the girl. Dust climbed from the ruts like smoke as Roy Calder reined his gelding to a stop at the edge of Cole Merrick's yard. June Ashby sat in the wagon bed with a canvas bundle clutched to her chest. Her hair was wind-tangled. Her mouth was set the kind of flat line that kept fear from spilling. Roy swung down and tipped his hat in a shape that wanted to be charming. It missed. "Evening, Cole. We got us an agreement." Cole stood at the porch rail with one hand around a post. He was taller than he looked from a distance, shoulders built by work face hidden under a hat bleached by summers. He did not step forward. "You brought what you said." Roy jerked his chin at the wagon. "Blood of my blood. Eats like a draft mule. Worth a horse and then some." He grinned without humor. "You got him saddled." Cole's eyes flicked to June. She did not meet them. He walked toward the small corral and led out a bay with a new saddle. The horse stamped and tossed his head. Cole patted the neck, once more habit than affection. "Ransom," he said to no one in particular. Roy's smile grew teeth. He took the reins and ran a palm down the bay's shoulder. Fine animal. He glanced back at June like a shopman checking a ledger. All square then. Cole looked at June again. The girl held his gaze for a breath long enough to show him there was a person behind the silence. Then she dropped it. "You can climb down," Cole said. Not unkind, only plain. June swung her legs over the wagon side and landed in her boots. The dust tucked into the lace of her skirt. She kept the bundle pressed to her ribs as if it were a part of bone. Roy slid into the saddle, heavy with satisfaction. Pleasure doing business. Try not to ruin her with chores. He laughed at his own line, tugged the reins, and turned the bay toward the road. Whiskey hung behind him like a scarf. The yard was quiet after he left. Grasshoppers ticked in the weeds. Out past the fence, 2 telegraph poles walked the edge of the road, and the wire between them sang a soft metallic whine in the wind. Cole lifted June's bundle from her hands without touching her skin and set it on the porch. "You can come in. Supper's on the stove." She nodded once. Inside smelled like pine smoke and coffee. The room was simple. A tin kettle waited on a black iron plate. A table with 2 chairs. A nail driven into the far post held a pocket watch with a cracked face. The hands were stopped at a wrong hour. June's eyes caught on the stove shelf. A small wooden bird sat there, a sparrow carved from cedar, its beak chipped, one wing darkened by old soot. She reached toward it and stopped herself. Cole followed her look. "My boy did that." The sentence hung in the air and then flattened. He went to the counter and ladled stew into 2 bowls. He set a 3rd plate at the far edge of the table and did not seem to notice he had done it. June stood by the door until he motioned to a chair. She sat careful as if the wood might splinter under her. He pushed a bowl toward her. "Eat." She picked up a spoon. The stew tasted of beef and onions and a little too much salt. Her hands shook at first, then steadied. Cole ate with workmanlike efficiency. Neither of them filled the silence with words that would ask for anything. He poured coffee into a tin cup and slid it to her. "Name?" "June," she said. "June Ashby." "Merrick," he said. "Cole." She nodded. "You work for your keep. I do not keep prisoners." He said it as though he were setting a fence post. June's throat tightened around something she could not name. She drank the coffee. It burned her tongue and settled the shaking in her fingers. When they finished, Cole stood and took her bowl. "You can sleep in the back room. There is a cot and a quilt. Water in the basin." He nodded toward the corner where a blue enamel pan waited with a clean rag folded beside it. She carried her bundle down the narrow hall. The small room held a cot, a crate used as a table, a single narrow window. The wind pushed at the pane and made it rattle. She set the bundle on the cot and unrolled it. A second dress, a comb with a missing tooth, a length of twine, a small book with no title. She smoothed the dress that would be for Sundays if Sundays came. When she came back to the main room, Cole had moved to the porch with a knife and a block of cedar. The knife made a soft, regular sound as he shaved thin curls that fell like feathers to the floor. He was not carving anything recognizable yet. He was just making wood small. The little pile smelled of sap and summer. June picked up the rag and wiped the table. She washed the bowls and set them upside down to dry. She folded the second chair's blanket and laid it over the back to straighten its edges. No one had told her to do any of it. She did not know what else to do. Cole spoke without turning. "Up before first light. Water comes from the spring house. Wood is stacked behind the shed. Chickens get fed first. Save the corn sacks." She said yes. The telegraph wire hummed under the wind, a faint sawtooth sound that seemed to live in the rafters. She drifted to the stove shelf again. The little cedar sparrow looked back at her with its awkward beak. She wiped a smudge from its wing with the hem of her sleeve and set it upright. Cole stopped the knife. He did not speak. She left it there clean and facing the room. At full dark, he set the knife aside and stood. He lifted the cracked watch from the nail, pressed the crown with his thumb, and listened. Nothing. He hung it back. "Lamp goes out at 9, he said. "Yes," she said. He picked up his hat, then set it back on the peg, then picked it up again, as if the motion itself helped him sort the weight under his ribs. "Good night, June." "Good night, Mr. Merrick." He made a small face. "Cole," he said. She nodded. "Cole." In the back room, the quilt held the smell of clean sun and storage. June lay on the cot with her boots side by side on the floor. Outside, the wind wheeled around the eaves and pushed the yard grass flat, then let it rise again. The bones in her forearms remembered the wagon boards. Her chest remembered holding breath to make her size small. She turned that memory over like a flat stone and set it down where she could watch it. A sound rose under the wind, soft and living. A horse in the corral blew through his nostrils and stamped. June sat up and went to the window. She could not see much. Only the suggestion of railings and a darker shape near them. The shape lifted a head and whickered not quite a call, more like a question. She eased the back door open and stepped into the night. The cold should have made her teeth ache. It did not. She crossed the packed dirt by feel. The horse came up to the fence and stood with his neck over the top rail. He was sorrel under the moon, a blaze down his face, a scar puckered at one knee that marked an old bad step. He smelled like hay and leather and something warm that had nothing to do with weather. "Comet," a voice said behind her. June startled. Cole stood in the yard with his hands in his pockets. He did not come closer. He likes the sound of hands on wood. He thinks he will be brushed. June touched the horse's face slow. The hair was short and slick. The skin twitched under her palm. Comet's breath fogged the air and touched her wrist. Her throat relaxed for the first time since the wagon had stopped. Cole looked at the sky, then at the fence line, then at the black cut of the road. "Door sticks when it swells," he said. "You gotta lift when you pull." "Yes," she said. She did not step away from the horse. Cole tipped his hat and turned back toward the porch. The lamp inside threw a weak gold square onto the yard and left the corners in shadow. When he reached the step, he paused and listened as if the night were speaking a language he had not heard in years. The telegraph wire sang again. On the far side of the road, something answered it. Not a sound you could point to. A mood carrying on air. June stood with the horse and looked toward the dark where the road fell into the cottonwoods. A long way off, hoofbeats beat a short pattern on hard ground. They hesitated. They picked up. Somewhere in that sound, a laugh rode the wind, dry as brush. She closed her hand around the fence rail until her knuckles shone pale in the moonlight. The lamp inside went out at 9. The wind turned cold by morning and made the pump handle bite her palm. June worked it until water came thin at first, and then steady. The bucket rode up her spine when she lifted. Her arms quivered. On the way to the spring house, she passed Cole heading for the woodpile. He said nothing. His breath hung white. She set the bucket on the porch rail to catch herself. Cole reached it in 2 steps, tipped it poured half across the steps, and handed it back. "Do not break your back proving something no one asked you to." June nodded a little heat under the cold. The chickens muttered when she scattered feed. Comet rattled his halter and nosed the fence. She ran the brush along his neck in long strokes. Hair came away on the bristles and clung to her sleeve. The kitchen held its night chill. She worked the iron stove door with a poker and coaxed flame from the ash. Coffee woke the room. Cole came in with split sticks stacked against his hip and set them by the box. He took the kettle without asking and poured. The third plate lay where he had left it at the far corner, like a place someone had chosen once and not returned. June straightened the tablecloth under it and did not move the plate. After breakfast, they hitched the small mare to the cart and went down the road that followed the telegraph poles. The wire hummed like a saw blade in the wind. Brimstone Flats came into view as a low string of buildings and a false front church with white paint that looked thin against the sky. Cole stepped off at the smithy for nails. June stayed with the mare and the reins. A man in a black coat with dust to his knees crossed the street. He lifted a hand by way of greeting. "Morning, Hollis Grant," he said. "I see you got work." June had to swallow before she found her voice. "Yes, sir." His eyes were kind without staring. "You do not owe anyone your story." He said it without weight, as if laying a clean cloth on a table. She nodded once. Cole came out with a small sack of nails and a strip of leather tucked under his arm. Hollis tipped his hat and stepped back. "Merrick," he said. Cole gave a short nod. They moved on. A woman with a baby on her hip watched from a doorway. The general store bell chirped twice, and then they turned back toward the river road. where the road touched the sage cottonwoods gathered close to the bank and made a cool green out of the light. A woman stood there with her skirts hitched boots in the water, pulling roots with a small trowel. She straightened and shaded her eyes. "You on the Merrick place." Cole kept the mare steady. "Yes." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Nell Reyes." She pointed with her chin at the cart. "You the new hand." June gave a small smile that did not ask for anything. June. Nell's gaze slipped to the old yellowed marks on June's wrist, the kind that left a shadow long after they healed. She did not remark on them. She reached into her basket and pulled out a twist of brown paper tied with string. "Wild daisy seed. Throw them by your porch. They fill empty." June took the packet. Paper rasped her fingers. "Thank you." "Comfrey if that thumb keeps cracking," Nell said, already kneeling to her work again. "Bring a jar if you want salve." Cole flicked the reins. The mare leaned into the traces. The road lifted toward the Merrick rise. June sat with the seed packet turned in her hands and watched dust plume off the cart wheels. They pulled up by the fence line on the north side where the posts had a tilt like old teeth. Cole tossed the nails into a canvas bag and set his hat farther down his brow. "Hold that post. Keep it steady." June braced her boots and wrapped her hands around the raw wood. Splinters bit into her skin. Cole lifted the hammer. The first strike rang in the open air and startled a magpie out of the brush. He set the nail with 3 sure blows. The post vibrated through June's arms long after the sound died. Sweat came across her upper lip. The sun pressed on her neck. He handed her the canteen when he noticed the drag in her breath. "Drink." The water tasted like tin and the cold in the spring house. June passed the canteen back and met his eyes without meaning to. "You do not talk much," she said. "Talking does not mend fences." He hit the next nail a clean rhythm. He added after a moment, almost to the wood, "Most people say too much and mean too little." Her mouth lifted a little. She looked away before he could read it. They worked the line through the heat of the afternoon. Later, when they climbed into the cart, her forearms trembled with a dull throb. She liked it. It made the day feel held. Comet paced the corral when they rolled in. June rubbed him down and checked the small scar at his knee. He leaned into the brush until her shoulder bumped the rail. Inside, she set beans to soak and cut an onion. When the knife hit the core, the smell climbed into her nose and stung her eyes. She started to hum without thinking. It was a shape of a tune from far back in a kitchen that had not been kind to her. She stopped when she heard herself. Cole spoke from his chair, "Either sing it through or do not start at all." June kept her face to the cutting board. "Yes, Cole." She started again and sang it out to the end. It was a short tune, and it felt longer than it was because nothing interrupted it. He was at the small shelf by the stove. She heard the scrape of cedar as he took the sparrow down. His thumb made a slow pass over the scorch on the wing. He set it back exactly where she had cleaned it that morning. The pocket watch on the nail caught a stray bit of late sun and threw it across the floor. The hands on its face stayed stuck at the wrong time. After supper, Cole took the knife and a block of wood out to the porch. The shavings curled off his blade and kissed his boots. June washed and stacked the bowls, wiped the table, and stepped outside. The light had the thin look of weather changing. Clouds piled in a way that looked too close to the ground. The telegraph wire on the road sang louder than usual, a high, thin sound that made the bones in the ear want to turn away. Cole looked up at the sky and then down at the far pasture. "Boards loose on the south door," he said. "I will fix it before dark." June went to the string of laundry she had hung earlier and began to pull it in. The towel twisted in her hands like a live thing. The first drop hit her knuckle big as a penny. The next brought dust with it. The wind came in a long breath and then stayed as if the valley were tilted and air was running off it. She took the basket to the kitchen and shut the window. The flame under the kettle went long and bent with the gusts that found their way in. She set the daisy seed near the shelf with the sparrow where she would not forget it. The lamp glass rattled and gave a small cry when the wind hit the wall. Cole crossed the yard with his shoulders squared to the push of air. He carried a coil of rope and a handful of nails. His hat stayed down, but the brim lifted at the edges. June watched him until he reached the barn. The first flash came without thunder, a hard white look that cut every edge in the yard into sharpness. June counted under her breath. She was at 7 when the sound came and pushed the window with a palm of force. Rain followed in a sheet. It hit the yard so hard it threw dirt back up into the air. The smell had a taste to it, metal and sap. She picked up the heavy canvas Cole used to throw over the woodpile in bad weather. She dragged it to the door and tried to flip it over the stacked cords. The wind caught the edge, slapped it back against her face, and filled it with air like a sail. She lost hold and grabbed again and got it down on the second tri-stones placed quick to keep it. Comet squealed from the corral and kicked an echo off the rail. June could not see the far fence now. The rain made a curtain and turned the yard to a moving thing. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and stepped out far enough to see the barn door. It jumped on its hinges, wood booming in a broke rhythm. Then the latch gave. The door blew wide and hammered the side of the barn. The sound had the feel of something that could not be taken back. June ran. The ground sucked at her boots. Mud climbed her skirts. She slid once and hit her knee and kept going. The rain got in her eyes and turned the world to water and light. "Cole," she shouted, the name pulled thin in the wind. She could not hear herself. She saw only the dark of the doorway and the shape of a man inside as the next flash came and held the yard in white for the time it takes to pull breath. The barn swallowed the light and threw it back in thin strips through the siding. Rain stitched the roof so fast it sounded like hard grain poured from a high bin. June reached the threshold and the wind shoved her sideways. The door banged again. A hand caught her arm and pulled her inside. Cole pushed his shoulder against the door and dropped the beam into place. The next gust hit and tested it. The hinges screamed and then settled. His hat was gone. Rain bled down his hair and along his jaw. He took his coat off with one rough movement and set it on her shoulders. It carried cedar and sweat and the outside. "You should have stayed in the house," he said, not sharp, tired. "I saw the latch go," she said. Her voice was small in the big dark. The horses stamped and blew. The mare's eyes flashed white in a strip of light. Comet threw his head and hit the stall rail. Cole stepped past June and put a hand on the horse's cheek. His thumb traced the bone under the hide. The animal dropped a step and eased. The storm rattled the whole building. Dust lifted in the loft and came down as brown breath. June stood with the coat around her like a sail without wind. She could feel the warmth climb back into her skin in slow rings. Cole looked at her once. The flash outside made lines appear on his face she had not seen in the house. He nodded at a bale near the wall. "Sit before you fall." June sank to it. Her boots were full of water. She poured them out by tipping each heel and watched the puddle run across the boards and disappear into the cracks. Cole checked the stall doors, set a fresh wedge where one had worked loose, and came back to stand near her. His shoulders moved with his breath. They did not touch. "Storms out here like to find what is weak," he said after a time. June's hands were around the coat. The wool scratched her palms. "Do they stop when they have taken it?" she said, more to the dark than to him. "They stop when they are done," he said. He reached up and touched the lowest rung of the ladder to the loft, as if it were a habit learned long ago. They stayed that way, with rain as talk and wind as reply. At some hour, the beating slackened and changed into a steadier fall. The thunder rolled far off like a wagon on stone. The horses began to chew the air like hay. June's eyes closed and opened and closed again. When she woke, gray light pushed through the chinks and made a soft square on the floor. She did not know she had slept. Cole was in the same place. A line of mud tracked his cheek, where he had wiped it with the wrong part of his hand. He saw her shift and picked up his coat from around her shoulders. "You are shaking," he said. "I'm fine," she said. It was true in a way it had not been yesterday. They unbarred the door and stepped into a yard that looked like a new place. The rain had scoured it clean and pressed everything flat. The porch steps wore a river's edge where the water had run. Comet snorted and sneezed and shook off what was left of the night. The telegraph wire sang a softer note, now no longer a blade, just a breath. Inside, June built a small fire that hesitated and then caught. She put the kettle on and cracked eggs into a pan. The shells were cold and perfect. Cole came in, left his boots on the mat, and washed his hands in the basin. He glanced at the shelf. The sparrow sat where it always sat, crooked and stubborn. He ate without rush, but without looking up much. When he stood, he paused by the nail that held the pocket watch. His thumb found the crown again and tested it. The hands did not move. He pressed his lips together and hung it back. June cleaned the skillet and stacked the plate with the others. She went to the back room and pulled her wet dress from the line. It was still damp at the hem. She changed and wrung the water out of her hair with a towel. When she stepped into the main room, Cole was at the door with his hat in his hand. Fence line needs a look," he said. "I will feed the chickens," she said. They met near the coop and worked without much talk. A quiet came on them that did not feel like lack. June lifted the grain scoop and the birds surged toward her feet. The sun climbed behind the tatters of cloud and laid a white light over the yard. Something changed in the air that had nothing to do with weather. The sound reached them through the cottonwoods. Hooves, not one, several. The ground seemed to learn it before her ears did. Cole turned his head. He did not say her name. He went to the porch, reached inside, and came back with the shotgun. He did not look different, only smaller, because the day seemed to step away from him to make room. 3 riders came off the road at a walk and then fanned at the gate. Roy Calder sat a bay with a bandaged arm. He carried his smile like a scar. The men on either side had faces that had never given back what they took. One wore a hat with the brim cut short, and the other wore his collar up like a fence. Roy leaned his weight on one stirrup and looked past Cole. He let his eyes find June and park there as if she were a stray dog he meant to claim. "Neighbor," he called. "Thought you might have something of mine." Cole did not lift the gun. He held it like a piece of furniture he had moved 1,000 times. "You are off your land." Roy's grin sharpened. "Blood says otherwise. Paper says otherwise. She rides with me and we call it even." June's hand closed around the rim of the grain bucket. It cut her palm just enough to anchor her. Cole set the end of the gun on the porch rail. "Turn around." The man with the cut brim nudged his horse a step and spat. "Heard you got short when somebody talked out of line." His hand drifted near his belt and stopped there like it was testing a story to see if it would hold. Roy moved his reins. "Hush, Wit. Let the farmer speak his piece." He kept his eye on June. "You look fed. That man feeding you, he is going to want his price." June felt heat crawl into her neck. She could not find any words that would not give something away. Cole lifted the shotgun from the rail and let the barrels fall a finger's width. "Turn around," he said again. The way he said it made it smaller and larger at the same time. The man named Wit laughed. It was not a big sound. It was dry. He twitched his hand like a man brushing off a fly and went for metal. The world snapped down to 3 places at once. Cole's finger, Wit's belt, June's breath. The shotgun spoke. Wit left his saddle like the wind pulled him. He hit the dust and made a shape in it and did not get up. The other man fired from his hip and blew splinters out of the porch post. June ducked without knowing she had moved. Roy shouted something and yanked his horse to cover. Cole stepped off the porch and into the yard. He moved with care and a kind of calm that had no show to it. He racked the shotgun and fired again. The second man dove behind the trough and returned fire blind and wild. The shot chewed the edge of the steps. Comet screamed from the corral and slammed a hoof into the rail. June crawled to the door, grabbed the small box of shells, and pushed it across the floor. Cole saw it and reached back without looking, found one with his fingers, and fed it home. The second man lifted to fire and took grain dust from the trough into his eyes. He cursed and ran for the open field. Cole let him go. Smoke made its own weather near the porch. Roy clutched his bandage and scowled. He looked smaller with his hat knocked back. His eyes had a fever strain in them. "You think this changes a thing," he said. "You think she is not what she is." Cole stepped closer, the gun low but ready. "Get off my land." Roy spat blood-stained spit into the dirt and smiled with too many teeth. "You are going to learn what family means." He pulled his horse around and put his heels to it. The bay gathered itself and stretched into the road. The man who had run took to the brush and found a different path. The place where Wit lay went quiet. June's ears rang. It was a small, thin sound under the bigger lack. Cole stood there for a time, like he had forgotten what to do next. Then he lowered the gun and set it against the rail. He looked at June as if asking permission for something he could not name. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," June said. Her knees did not agree, but she was speaking for the parts that mattered. Cole nodded. He went to the cottonwood beyond the yard and stood with his hands on his hips, head bowed. When he came back, he carried a spade. He did not ask for help. He dug through earth that was still wet from the storm. He made a long, narrow cut and did what a man does when there is a body where a man might fall asleep. June watched from the porch. She held the box of shells tight to keep her hands from shaking. The telegraph wire sang a thin song in the afternoon. It sounded farther away than it had in the morning. Cole washed his hands and forearms at the basin until the water went pink and then clear. He sat on the step and looked at his palms as if they had misled him. June wiped the table and set the kettle on out of habit. The house wanted order. She gave it some. Later, when she went to the back room, she paused at the doorway and felt the small tug in her middle that had been mild for a week and now carried a weight. She counted without meaning to. The days did not add the way they usually did. Her fingers found her lower belly light as if a press would break what was not yet built. The pocket watch on the nail did not move. The sparrow watched the room with its crooked beak. June lifted her coat from the peg and held it to her chest. The sound of the river reached through the open window, a cool constant. She thought of the adobe house by the sage and a woman with her boots in the water and a basket full of roots. Night wanted the yard. She let it have it and blew the lamp when the clock she did not trust said it was time. The light had a washed look when June set out along the river path. Cottonwoods walked the bank in a crooked line, their leaves talking over her head. The adobe house crouched near the bend where the water slowed. Smoke lifted from a short stovepipe and folded into the pale sky. Nell Reyes opened the door with her sleeves pushed to the elbow and a smear of earth on one cheek. "You came early," she said. "That is the right way to come." June stood inside the cool room and held her hands together to keep them from telling on her. Jars lined a low shelf. The air smelled of dried mint and rubbing alcohol. A narrow bed stood under the window with a quilt folded at the foot. Nell's touch was brisk and careful. She asked for the date of the last bleed and did her counting in a whisper. She pressed light at June's lower belly and nodded once as if a quiet word had been spoken inside her hands. 8 weeks, she said, strong in there. She set a small cone of tin against June's skin and tilted her head listening. Too soon to hear it yet. But I feel what I need to feel. June looked at the rafters until her eyes burned. It let the sting go somewhere else. When she blinked, the world came back into one piece. Nell tied a ribbon of blue cloth around June's wrist with a neat knot, for holding a place. "You give it to the baby if you like, or keep it if you need it." June nodded. The cloth felt like a promise that did not speak. Outside, Sage River ran a steady sound. The road home was a long stretch of light. June walked it with her hand in front of her, the ribbon bright against her skin. When the house came up, she could see Cole on the porch bench with the door latch in pieces on his knee. He worked a file, slow and patient draw and lift. He looked up when she stepped into the yard. His mouth started to say a plain thing and did not finish it. She crossed the space between them and set his palm on her belly. The breath he took was not big. It was careful. He searched her face as if he were reading a sign in low light. "Are you sure?" he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice found the quiet right away. Nell said so. He did not speak. He rose and put both hands up to her face. His thumbs found the soft places under her eyes, then fell. He kissed her like a man who had not planned it and could not have done otherwise. It was not a long kiss. It left them both breathing like they had walked a hill. When he stepped back, his eyes shone in a way the room had not seen. He covered it by setting the latch parts into a neat line. His hands shook a little, then steadied. Hoofbeats broke the moment and came to the yard at a respectful pace. Sheriff Lyle Booker slid down from a roan and took his hat off as if he were coming into church. He stayed in the dust and did not bring it inside. "Merrick," he said. He saw the ribbon at June's wrist and paused a fraction. He went on in the same voice. "Roy Calder has been seen on the Red Butte Road. He is not alone. Ephraim Pike came up from south of Laramie. They were asking in Brimstone whether you had a new hand. They asked whether she was carrying." June could feel the ribbon against her pulse like a small bird in a hand. Cole's face did not change much. A color went out of it and was replaced by something cut from harder stock. "You tell them anything," Cole said. "I tell the same thing I tell any man who asks at my door," Booker said. "Nothing that belongs to a house leaves that house in my mouth." His eyes went from June to Cole. "I thought you should know." Cole nodded once. "You told us." The sheriff settled his hat low again. "Red Butte Pass is a place where men who mean wrong like to think they are big." The rock throws a voice back. "It can make a man believe in his own echo." He looked at the porch rail where the shotgun leaned. "Do what you think is right," he said. He mounted and rode out No Dust Left because the ground still held yesterday's rain. Cole went into the house and set his hand on the stove shelf. His fingers touched the carved sparrow and then left it. He took the shotgun down and checked the chambers. He wiped the barrels with a cloth and set them by the door. He went to the peg and lifted his coat and hat. June stood there with the ribbon showing. "Do not go alone," she said. He tied the laces at his throat and faced her. "I will be back," he said. He did not promise. He said it the way he said other true things in a day. He reached for the sparrow and set it in her palm. "Keep it near." Comet took the saddle like he knew why. Cole led him to the yard, stepped into the stirrup, and sat easy. He touched his brim toward June and took the Red Butte Road at a ground-eating trot. The pass rose from the flat like a cut wound. Red stones stood up in sheets and leaned on the sky. The telegraph line went through on iron poles and sang a note that changed with the wind. A lantern hung on a peg at a waypost and swung lazy in the still part of the canyon. Roy Calder waited in the shadow of a rock face with Ephraim Pike on his right, and the third man from yesterday missing from his left. Roy had a bandage under his coat. He looked smaller in daylight and more dangerous. Ephraim had the same narrow jaw June remembered from winters that did not end. His eyes were a color that did not pick up light. Cole reined Comet at a distance that made sense for a conversation and not for a shot. He stepped down and left the reins long. His boots gritted on the red dust. Roy smiled without showing teeth. "Neighbor, I came to tidy what you spilled in your yard." Cole shifted the shotgun to a carry he had used before he owned land. "Turn around and keep riding," he said. Ephraim's laugh had no weight. "You do not speak to me like I am a man you can send away." He looked Cole up and down and found nothing to respect in the inventory. "You have something of mine." Cole's eyes did not give him an inch. "You do not know the meaning of mine." Roy slid his hand along his horse's neck. "Paper is a thing a man can put in a pocket," he said. "Blood is a thing he cannot wash out. You took a piece of blood and called it yours." Cole kept his voice even. "She is a person who sets her own feet. She put them on my porch because the road behind her was bad. She stays there because she wants to." Ephraim sniffed. Wants do not weigh much. His hand drifted toward his belt the way a wolf drifts to the edge of a herd. The canyon air had a heat to it that did not belong to the temperature. The wire hummed above and made a shape of sound that touched bone. Roy's smile slipped. He saw Cole's eyes and read the part that would not bend. "You think you are the last fence between me and what I came for," Roy said. He pulled his reins in small jerks like a man who had run out of patience with his own mouth. "Then be a fence." Ephraim's gun came up first. Cole moved with it. The shotgun spoke and took Roy out of his saddle like a rope had been cut. Roy hit the red dirt and rolled onto his back and looked surprised at the sky. Ephraim's shot found Cole's side and sent heat through him that was big enough to be a person. Cole went to a knee and felt the world turn in his head and then come back right side up. He slid to a boulder and counted breaths until he could see again. Ephraim used the waypost for cover and broke the lantern with his elbow. Kerosene bled down the post and caught a spark off a careless shot. Fire went up in a clean line and turned the air into a mirror. Cole leaned out at the lick of flame and fired. The shot took the wood near Ephraim's ear and threw splinters. Ephraim ducked and returned fire, and caught Cole's coat and took a button and put a sting across his ribs. They worked the rock and the post like two men clearing brush from a line and not wanting the other to have the land when they were done. Comet screamed and pulled the reins to a knot. The wire sang louder overhead. Smoke moved between the men and pulled their shapes thin. Ephraim stepped out into it to find a better angle and made himself bigger than he needed to be. Cole put the second barrel into that space and fired. Ephraim turned once and sat down like a man who had decided to rest. His hat slid forward over his eyes. His gun fell with no ceremony and clicked against the post. The fire ran out of kerosene and fell to a wet hiss. The canyon held the echo a long time. Cole got to his feet and pressed his hand on his side where the heat had started. The red on his palm did not lie. He walked to Roy and looked down at him. Roy's mouth moved, then stopped moving. Sheriff Booker came in slow from the eastern cut with a pair of men from Brimstone behind him. He took in the shape of the ground without asking for an explanation. His gaze went to Cole's side. He hauled a clean cloth from his saddlebag and pressed it into place with his own hand. "Save your breath," he said. "That is for walking." They got Cole up on Comet and turned his head toward the river. The world tried to tip him sideways, and he set his jaw against it. The road out of the pass had a step to it that Comet made small. The cottonwoods came into view like a welcome that was not loud but meant. They made half the way before Cole slid. Booker caught him under the arm and took the weight. Nell's door opened at first knock. She had the bed ready and the kettle boiling before Booker could say which side the bullet had taken. The room filled with the smell of iron and boiled linen. Nell set the pocket watch from Cole's chain on the table so his coat would not drag it to the floor. The cracked face looked up at the ceiling. The hand stayed wrong. June, Booker said. "Fetch her," Nell said. He was already in the saddle. June met the sheriff at the yard with the ribbon at her wrist and the sparrow in her pocket. Her feet moved before she finished hearing his words. The river path unrolled fast under her. She pulled breath like a woman coming up out of cold water and did not notice the stitch in her side until the adobe door gave under her hand. Cole lay gray and open-eyed. The bandage at his ribs held a dark flower. His hand found the edge of the sheet and fussed at a loose thread like a man would who wanted something his body could do. June's throat closed and opened again. She went to him and set her palms around his hand and told herself to be a place where he could rest. "You did not listen," she said. It came out a whisper. "I listen badly," he said. His voice rasped like a match. A line near his mouth made a small turn. He is gone, both of them. He looked at her belly with a new respect, not a distance. I would not let them near you. Nell moved like a machine worked by care. She washed and stitched and set a poultice that smelled of tobacco and something sweet. She made June drink a tin cup of water and put another in Cole's hand and made him take it a little at a time. Booker stood at the door and watched the yard the way a man looks at a field he knows the measure of. I will speak the names in town, he said. There will be no noise at your gate for this. June nodded without looking up. She sat on the edge of the bed until her back ached and then sat some more. The light shifted on the wall and made the cracks in the plaster look like a map. Comet grazed in the patch of grass by the river with his head low and his knee scar bending when he stepped. By evening, Cole slept the heavy sleep that takes men when pain lets go for a while. June laid her palm on his forearm and felt the slow thud in him. Under her own hand lower, something answered small and sure and busy. Nell cooled the room with a cross breeze and turned the lamp down. She wiped her hands and set the cracked pocket watch back on the table where the light found it. The hands did not move. The telegraph wire on the far bank drew a thin line of sound across the valley. The river kept its steady talk under it. Spring came clean and slow. Sage River ran high and cold. Cottonwoods filled with a sound like rain, even when the sky held blue. Nell let Cole walk the length of the adobe room before she let him out of it. He went careful, one hand on the wall, the other on the edge of the bed, as if feeling for a shape inside himself that had changed. When he could cross the floor without losing the light in his face, she sent them home with a small jar of salve and a list spoken more with looks than with words. June planted the daisy seed the same day. The packet rasped her fingers. She pressed them along the porch in a shallow line, 3 fingers deep, then brushed soil back over with the side of her hand. The dirt took it without fuss. Comet grazed near the fence and lifted his head now and then as if counting. Inside, Cole set the sparrow on the table and drew the knife from the sheath. He cut pine into pieces that turned into the sides of a crib. Cedar shavings curled and piled at his boots. He rasped the edges until they would not catch on, skin-tested every joint, and fitted the last slat so it sang when it settled. At night, the knife rested, and his open palm found June's back in a way that said he had not left the hard parts, only set them down for an hour. Shoots pushed through by the porch, green in a row, thin and brave. The pains took June on a clear afternoon when the wind smelled like rain far away. Cole saddled Comet and tied blankets across the cantle. He lifted June up with care and walked the reins at a steady pace. Her breath went short, then found a count. The adobe house turned the corner of the river like a place they had known a long time. Nell had water heated and a clean bed. She checked with hands that had done the work in summer and winter. Sheriff Booker waited outside with his hat in his hands and a stride he could not smooth, watching the river carry light. June gripped the bed frame in waves and let the wire of pain run and then pass. Cole held her hand and did not speak. His jaw told his part. When she could not keep the tune of her breath, he kept it for her, and she fell back into it. The room narrowed to the hiss of the lamp and the soft commands that came like well-laid nails. The world cracked and then opened. A small cry lifted high and fierce and put something right that had not been right for a long time. Nell wrapped the child and placed her along June's shoulder. The skin smelled like milk that had not yet been found, and something clean enough to make the eyes sting. Cole's hand hovered, then settled at the edge of the blanket, as if warming a bird that had landed there of its own mind. "Girl," Nell said, soft, strong voice. June looked at the small face and then up at Cole. "Wren," she said. He tried the name like wood under a blade. "It took," Wren, he said back. They stayed until the dark cooled the walls. Booker brought the mare to the door and turned his eyes away because the room had become a place he did not belong. He said the road was clear and left by the path that left the least sound. They brought Wren home when the moon was a pale slice over the pasture. The house smelled of cedar and coffee. The crib waited under the window. Cole lifted the sparrow from the table and tied it to the crib rail with a strip of leather hung so it could move with the air. June slid the blue ribbon from her wrist and tied it next to the bird. The ribbon caught a thin light and held it. Morning put gold along the porch. Daisies opened like small suns that had chosen this one patch of dirt. June carried Wren out in a blanket and sat with her feet on the step. The chickweed had come up in the yard, and Comet's knee bent easy again when he shifted. Cole brought a pail of white paint from the shed and set it by the door. He stirred until the surface made a small whirl. He took a brush and drew the first line down the plank. The smell rolled out and filled the porch with a promise that did not need talk. He painted in long, sure strokes, letting the white take the brown, until the door turned from something that had held a house closed to something that welcomed and set a boundary at the same time. June rocked Wren with a touch that kept time she did not know she had. The child made small breaths that lifted and fell in a rhythm that did not belong to the wire or the wind. Inside, Cole set his hat on the peg and reached for the pocket watch out of habit. He pressed the crown and listened with no hope and no dread. A sound rose from the cracked face, small and patient, ticking quiet as a cricket in a far field. He smiled so little it almost did not show. He hung it back on the nail and watched the minute hand move the width of a grain of sand. Sheriff Booker came at noon and stopped his horse by the cottonwood beyond the yard. He said the names in a voice that did not carry past the shade. There would be no papers. No men came asking at his desk. He tipped his hat toward the porch without stepping onto it. Cole shouldered a spade later and went with June under the cottonwood where he had turned earth before. They set a small cross there, not for anyone who would want their name cut into wood, but for the pieces that had kept the yard loud at night. June pressed the soil flat with her palm. The bark under her fingers had a warm feel to it, and the wind moved through the leaves with the sound of water poured from a height. The house settled into its new shape. The white door dried to a quiet glow. The crib took its marks from a small heel and the edge of a fist. June sang without stopping herself. Cole walked the fence with a lighter step and checked the south door out of habit, then let the habit ease. Evening laid itself over the field. June sat with Wren on her lap and watched the last light slide across the painted door. Cole joined her and did not need to speak. He set his hand over hers and the child's 3 weights in one place. She looked toward the road where the telegraph poles made their march. The wire rested in the low wind and did not sing. Inside, the pocket watch kept time steady as breath. Comet blew a content sound and settled the length of one foreleg. June turned to Cole. "I was a trade once," she said. He watched her a moment, then the yard, then back, like measuring a line that had finally run true. "You are here," he said. Wren sighed and opened her small fist. The sparrow on the crib turned in a slow circle in the faint draft from the window and then came to rest beak forward, keeping watch. The daisies at the step leaned together and held their light a little longer before the dark took it. The house breathed, and the land breathed with it. They walked, the light changed, the day went on, the line of them stayed together. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.